So I guess we'll be starting. So allow me to welcome the moderator of the session, Professor Ronak Zahan, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue, Bangladesh. And on panel, as a panelist, we have Dr. Brendan Vikers, Advisor, Head and Trade, International Trade Policy Section, Commonwealth Secretariat, UK. Mr. Vivek Rana, who is a prominent figure in the IT sector of Nepal. Please there. Mr. Saeed Yusuf Sadat, Research Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue, Bangladesh. Ms. Sonika Manandar, who is the co-founder of the Alloy Technology, Nepal. And we have Mr. Ajit Bikram Saha, who is the founding chairman, American Chamber of Commerce in Nepal, AmCham. And he is also the director and CEO of Lotus Holdings, Nepal. So thank you everyone for being here. I guess I'll hand over the mic to our moderator and she can take it forward from here.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all welcome you to this parallel session, which is titled Technology and Innovation for an Equitable Green Transformation in South Asia. So the two instruments for bringing equitable green transformation we will discuss. One is technology and one is innovation. We generally would think that they are interrelated, innovation and technology, but they may not necessarily be always the same. Innovations may lead to technology, but sometimes it could be an innovation in practice, or sometimes technology could be an old technology, for instance. So the speakers, if they want to, they could address this conceptual difference. Also, the focus is not just on green transformation, but equitable green transformation. So the technology and innovations that we will be talking about should focus on equitable green transformation. Already one of the panelists told me that he's not going to talk about equitable transformation. He would mainly focus on green transformation. But again, it is up to always you ask panelists to address certain questions, but the panelists have certain things that they want to talk about. So I'm sure that no matter what questions I raise, then my panelists would come around to sharing with you what they have in their mind. So, if we talk about equitable green transformation, then I think the two other issues that we need to address. One is, how do we prioritize amongst all the various technologies and innovation if we want to be equitable? And there the question of inclusiveness comes into the question, and whether these technologies or innovations are going to address the needs of the marginalized and vulnerable groups. And amongst the vulnerable and the marginalized groups, I think one particular group that you may want to discuss are women, who are often the worst sufferers of climate change. All the panelists have been given, the organizers have sent a concept note where they have highlighted certain sectors, and they have also raised some questions. The sectors that were highlighted in terms of technology and innovation are primarily three different sectors. One is renewable energy, another is agriculture, and another is rapid urbanization and urban growth. And then there were certain questions that the panelists were asked to address, and they include identification of barriers of technology development, addressing distributional impact of technology, and education and training needs for future labor market. Of course, we all know a very critical issue when we think of technology and innovation, then the cost and financing becomes very important. And related to cost and financing is, of course, another very critical issue, and that is intellectual property rights. And I think some of you may want to address that particular question. I have to admit that I am not at all an expert on green transformation or environment. So I would raise 3 questions with the panelists from a layperson's perspective, because I think in the final analysis, when we try to advocate policies with political actors who would not be experts, but they would be lay people, and so that if one needs to then convince them as to if we are addressing or advocating certain kinds of issues. So my first question is that we can think of different technologies and different innovations, but if we are thinking in terms of South Asian countries, and we are thinking of the most vulnerable groups and equitable transformation, then which technologies you think would be most cost effective that we would prioritize at this stage? So this is my first question. The second question for the panelists is this, that in this race for green transformation, that I find that we coming from the southern countries or underdeveloped countries or developing, whatever you may want to identify ourselves with, that we are often following a curve, but we are never ahead of the curve. And so that could we think of certain kinds of innovations where we could be ahead of the curve? We have been talking about technology transfers, problems of technology transfer for the last almost 50 years. I think the first UN conference was in 1972, and we have been talking about technology transfers. And here I think South Asia probably has a lot to learn from China, which also came out of colonial subordination around the same time as us, in fact, slightly later. But now they have become leaders in technology development. So how is it that China came from behind and then now could be really leaders in this, in terms of innovation and technology? So this is my second question. And the final question is that in this conference, we are all interested and believe in South Asian cooperation. So, but we also know that in many sectors, and including in technology and innovation, there is not that much exchange or cooperation going on. And South Asian countries, if we have relationships, if we are, say, for instance, importing solar panels, we are getting it from China, for instance. So what would be, if we want to have a South Asian cooperation, then it has to really serve the interests of each individual country. So what kinds of areas we can cooperate where all the South Asian countries would find it in their own national interest to cooperate within South Asia. And then what could be the forums? For instance, could South Asia take a common stand when they are negotiating in WTO or any other international forum? So what could be the form of cooperation that would serve, perceived to serve the interests of each country, and also whether there are certain areas or forums, at least where we could cooperate. So I would now hand it over to the panelists, and I would give the panelists 2 rounds. So in the initial round, if each panelist could speak for, say, 5 to 6 minutes, and then I will open it up for question and answer from questions from the audience, and then we will go for another round. So the first panelist I would call on is Brendan Vickers. He works for the Commonwealth Secretariat. So I suppose he has also a little bit of global overview, since from that vantage point, maybe Brendan can make some remarks. Over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Professor Jahan. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm definitely going to be giving a global perspective, coming from the Commonwealth Secretariat. Really thank you for the invitation to be here today on this panel. I'd like to share some of the findings from a report that we did with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, which is about harnessing intellectual property rights for, let me just start the clock, for innovation, development, and economic transformation in least developed countries. Because I think this provides a more global context for some of the conversations and the issues that will be picked up by the panel. And from the outset, we need to say that innovation and technology are going to be key to addressing some of the global challenges that we face, particularly the climate crisis. And our Secretary General always has this saying that she says, human ingenuity got us into this problem, which is climate change. And so human ingenuity must get us out of this crisis that we face. And this is really about the role of human innovation and collective action, both in creating and solving global challenges like climate change, but also building resilience and supporting a just, fair, and equitable green transformation. And to foster the innovation in this sphere, intellectual property rights have never been more economically and politically important than they are today. And we see these conversations around different forms of intellectual property rights taking place in diverse topics. Most recently, public health with the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccines. I'm not going to get into that. But other pressing issues facing this region like food security, trade, education, biodiversity, and others. And we need a good understanding from our perspective how intellectual property rights can function to support this green transformation that we are talking about. The Commonwealth has 14 least developed country members. This includes Bangladesh, and which is graduating in 2026 along with Nepal. And one of the big challenges facing least developed countries is the loss of flexibilities under the TRIPS agreement. And that's something that we try to address in this report as well, and what the next steps have to be. We also have another LDC, Maldives, that previously graduated, and a non-Commonwealth country, Bhutan, graduated last year. So in the Commonwealth, when we talk about our least developed country members, two things come to mind: the importance of structural economic transformation and the importance of building productive capacity. And these are instrumental also to green industrialization that we spoke about at length yesterday. And the question is, how do we use research and development, innovation and technological advancement to advance these objectives in a very holistic approach to building productive capacity? And I think this is even growing, this is even more important in terms of the evolution of frontier technologies like AI and blockchain, digitalization, and so innovation and education in science, technology, engineering and mathematics becomes even more important, particularly for women and girls. What the main argument of our report is that LDCs should consider protecting and encouraging their innovations as part of a wider development strategy to build and diversify their productive capacities, including in green industries and green goods. And appropriately targeted intellectual property protection can be a powerful catalyst and enabler to support these goals. But I think it's important in a developing country context, and particularly for least developed countries, to really consider what kinds of intellectual property rights are best suited for the local conditions, the local levels of development, technological capabilities and advancements in that context. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution approach. We know that levels of innovation and levels of research and development are often very limited in many of our least developed countries in the Commonwealth, and this is particularly when you measure it by traditional metrics like number of patents that are being granted or sought. This is for several reasons. I think generalized poverty means that domestic markets are small and stagnant, so the incentives to invest and innovate are weak. There's lack of finance for research and development, limited skills in STEM, and that innovation really tends to happen through small, gradual improvements to existing products, services, or processes, particularly in SMEs, and particularly often in the informal sector, where a mainstream IPR approach doesn't always work. So in this report, we put forward 5 policy recommendations as those I wanted to share as an overarching perspective for this panel. We call for developing and sequencing of intellectual property and intellectual property rights to account for the diverse productive capabilities, capacities for technological absorption, competitive strengths, stages of development, and the economic structures in each country. So the 5 recommendations from this report is: first, we need to mainstream strategic intellectual property protection in least developed countries. Intellectual property protection shouldn't be thought of as an afterthought in a way, but rather mainstreamed at the national level as part of a holistic approach to development and coordinated with industrial, trade, agriculture, and other complementary development policies. And this has implications for the sectors and products. We don't all have to have a sophisticated patent regime. Sometimes, lower levels of protection like utility models, copyrights, trademarks, industrial designs, even GIs, which can be really important for empowering women farmers, can be very important. And I'll just list the other 3 and then we can discuss them later. The second is to gear national intellectual property systems and related frameworks to support innovation. To scale up technology transfers to LDCs. We know that there's a call in the TRIPS agreement for developed countries to incentivize their business to transfer technology, and this has really fallen by the wayside, so we do need to do more around that. We need to account for innovation in the informal economy, and we need to include innovation policies as part of LDC graduation strategies, particularly in Bangladesh with the pharmaceutical industry and others. So thank you for the opportunity to share these findings and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Brendan. But as I said, that I'm not an expert in this area, but it will be interesting at a later point to get some examples from you as to how intellectual property rights can, mostly these are held by more developed countries, and whether you have examples where these rights has been used by countries like ours in South Asia that we could hold on to, and we could even say export these kinds of things outside. So I think that would be something that I would like to hear, because many of the cases we know, particularly in agriculture, is that many of the traditional knowledge and all of that has been utilized and used by some multinational companies in terms of seeds and other things, and the women sort of lost out in that context. I would now request our second panelist, Vivek Rana. He is an IT expert from Nepal. And I think he has, from what I could see, that everybody knows him here, that he has worked a great deal with also with the government. So you have 5 to 6 minutes for your initial presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I don't think I'll need that much time. I think I will wrap it up in 4 minutes. Again, I'm not a subject matter expert in this area, but given the context Professor has provided, I have a few things to add to it. And I'm purely looking at it from a Nepali perspective of how things are in Nepal, rather than from a regional perspective, which I assume it is fairly similar in other countries as well. The issue in Nepal when it comes to innovation, we have seen over the years, innovation has not been a challenge in Nepal. What the real challenge is the diffusion. Because we don't have proper systems, proper institutions, proper framework, or proper legal aspects to make innovation, to be able to diffuse the innovation. People are so much concentrated on talking about innovation because they can relate that directly to the growth, to GDP, and to economic activities that the person or the nation could get. But I think over the years, by looking at the innovations that have come out of Nepal, it's at a very low scale. It's at a very low scale because the diffusion is not there. Innovators are not being incentivized. There is no incentive of becoming an innovator. Over the years, there are a lot of innovators who are there, But we've not been able to bring that into practice, bring that into consumption, and also bring that into a regular practice whereby we can learn and improve on that. We have seen in many instances where there has been a great innovation, but then it died as an innovation because there were no industry, no infrastructure, and no institution that was willing to take it up forward. I think that's one of the key challenges when it comes to innovation in Nepal, and I'm sure that is also quite similar to the examples in Pakistan or Bangladesh. The second point, when you say which technology you think or which service you think could be beneficial to the region, which of course involves the SAARC region, the 5-6 countries that are members of SAARC. And one of the things that have been really taking traction in Nepal, and I'm sure it's also in Bangladesh and India as well, is the cross-border payment. Nepal has had a huge difficulty in terms of making cross-border payments because each of the central bank has its own regulation. 70% of our trade is still with India. It sways between 65 and 72 year and year. But the payment between across the border has been a great problem because every time when somebody has to travel from Nepal to India, there is a certain cap that the central bank has put in that they can only carry so much of cash with them. Since there is so much of trade going on, this has now been expanded through cross-border payments, both starting off with a P2M, which is called a person-to-machine, and then later on moving into areas of P2P, person-to-person, where they can easily transfer money from one country to the other country. And that's going to relatively, hopefully, simplify trade, as well as people visiting from one part of the country to the other. We have not yet done that with Bangladesh yet, but there has been some progress made with Sri Lanka, with the Lanka Pay. So this is an area where I see quite a bit of collaboration happening on. But on the other side, if you look at the technology and look at the green transformation, there is very little actually knowledge about this within the IT tech community. And the reason for that is they have not thought in these terms about the carbon emission, about the footprinting, zero footprinting. It has never come to their mind. And now with the advent of AI and organizations moving into large language processing, which is going to require huge amount of energy to process it, there's not been any thoughts around it. And the real challenge is to address that as Nepal goes on now in about 6 months' time developing its first AI strategy to address this issue right there before it gets too late. The Europeans have now realized how important the sustainability factor with AI is. We are starting late. We have that opportunity to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One question for you, that I agree that the challenge is diffusion, and then you talk about incentives. But who will provide the incentives? Are you looking for the governments to do that, or it is the market place that will provide these kinds of incentives? So what will be the prime movers in that situation? Another question, yesterday, I am just new to Nepal, and I was quite surprised to hear that Nepal is second to Norway in terms of this electric cars that Nepal is using, which of course in terms of green is very good. But I had two questions. I thought that then these cars must be very expensive also. So when you are thinking of equitable, then that was one question. And then I was also told that sometimes we find that something benefits, but there are other things that we have not thought about. then I was told that because of certain kinds of excise duties and all of these kinds of patterns, now the government is not getting as much money in their exchequer as a result of now this transition. So anyway, I wanted to get your take on it. Our next speaker is Yusuf Sadat. He is also from Bangladesh, and Yusuf is a researcher, and Yusuf can talk about either from the Bangladesh perspective or anything else. As a researcher, there are no boundaries in terms of one's perspective and expertise. Over to you, Yusuf.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Swati, for organizing this event. I will just begin by saying that technology and climate change and environment at first might not seem too closely related, but if you look at it in a different way, you'll see that some of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world are also least developed countries, which are not technologically very advanced, and they depend on other countries for their technological needs. And because of that, some of their technological needs are sometimes it gets very expensive for them to get hold of critical technology to solve immediate challenges, and some of that critical technology is often behind patents and trademarks and all those things. And we saw this in full force during the COVID-19 pandemic, when people were dying from the virus, but we couldn't get hold of the vaccines on time, and we couldn't convince anyone to give us the patents for the vaccines so that we can produce it in Bangladesh. As you know, Bangladesh has a very thriving pharmaceutical industry which exports to many countries of the world, and we could have easily produced our own vaccines. So in terms of climate change also, we face a similar problem, that addressing climate change, whether it is mitigation or adaptation or loss and damage, all of these things require two things. One is climate finance, which is very limited and which is very hard for us to obtain. And the other is technology. And there is technology related to mitigation in terms of becoming more energy efficient. There is technology related to adaptation, where you adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change, and also technology related to loss and damage, so that you can build back better after a climate disaster. And in each of these cases, we find that most of these technologies are behind patents and intellectual property rights, making it very difficult for us to make a green transition without actually, compromising our growth and development opportunities. So this is the point that I would like to make, that, for countries like Bangladesh and other least developed countries, mitigating the adverse impacts of climate change, adapting to climate change, or even dealing with loss and damage, technology is critical, and intellectual property rights sometimes can stand in the way. And although there is the trade-related agreement, a WTO agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, which does give some flexibility to the least developed countries till 2033. However, countries which are graduating out of LDC group, they will no longer be able to getting on all these privileges. So that makes it quite difficult. And also the 2033 issue, initially when these waivers under TRIPS agreement were given, they were given on the basis that LDCs need some time to develop their technological base. But even after 2033, some countries will remain as LDCs, and they will still not have a technological base actually. So then what will happen to them? So that is another concern. So without access to the technology, I think for LDCs it will be very challenging to deal with climate change, and to whether it is mitigation or adaptation or loss and damage. And to talk about a few of the things which you have mentioned and what the other panelists have also talked about. One thing is that you've asked us that are there innovations where we are a bit ahead? So there may be, like, for instance, I think the other panelists can also say, for instance, mobile money and finance, fintech, we are quite ahead in that. And how did China become a leader? Maybe it has to do something with education and what they have done in their higher education system. And also regarding regional cooperation, one of the technologies has already been mentioned. I'd just like to point out another issue is that most of the South Asian countries are very vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. And so regional cooperation on early warning systems, we already have that. It is called Regional Integrated Multi-Hazard Early Warning System. So under that, we could do more work, I think, because whenever there is a natural disaster, sometimes it is trans-boundary and transnational. So a problem, a climate change, natural disaster in one country sometimes affects the other countries in the region. So with that, I'll end here, and maybe in the next round we'll say a little more. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. One question then for you. I mean, we all know about the intellectual property rights and patent rights and how this is creating so much problem for the countries which don't hold those rights. But could we think of, I mean, like now we have many publications which are open access, for instance. You don't have to pay for it. So, I mean, all these patents and all of that, they always say they need it for R&D, but this is actually pharmaceutical big business. I mean, they are making such huge sums of money. So what would be an ideal recommendation that one could make that from countries like Bangladesh or Nepal, that in terms of this property rights, and particularly because both of our countries we are graduating out of LDC status soon. So is there some kind of a common position that we can come to moving forward? So for your next round, you can address this. The next speaker is Monica Manandhar, and she is a co-founder of Alloy Technology in Nepal. Again, I think she comes from private sector background. So, Sonika, you could now speak or address any of the questions or address something new. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and great presentation from fellow panelists before me. Before I answer the question, I think it would make sense to talk a little bit about what my work is about here in Nepal. So I'm leading a financial technology company where we work with the informal sector micro-entrepreneurs, specifically in green sectors such as agriculture and electric vehicles, transportation entrepreneurs. And one of the major challenges that any types of informal sector micro-entrepreneurs has is they're not trusted to get the kind of access to, kind of finances they need to grow their business. Which is why our platform is generating data that proves the investability for these informal sector green micro-entrepreneurs. Sometimes they need money to adopt electric vehicles. Sometimes farmers need money to adapt to new type of climate conditions and stay as the agricultural business that they have. Now that I've touched upon the financial side of it, right, and we're talking about the green transition, I think specifically for South Asian countries, specifically talking with my experience with Nepal's MSMEs, green transition for them is expensive. It's not cheap, right? And having to find that kind of financing and not being trusted to get that kind of financing from the formal financial institutions, it's even more expensive, right? So if you're not trusted, you don't have traditional form of collateral or the trusting, infrastructures that we have built in the financial sector. And now you have to go and buy the electric vehicle that is maybe 2 times expensive than they usually have to buy, right? And why I'm saying this is, as you said, Nepal has been one of the pioneer for leading electric vehicle in public transportation. It was in mid-1990s that Nepal launched over 714 electric vehicles, all driven by women and owned by women, and it was started with one of the projects. If you go around in Kathmandu, it's your second day here, but maybe if you have time to go around, you can see the green Safa tempos, 3-wheeler, right now mostly driven by women, but there are males as well. But it's been 3 decades that happened, right? Now they need to transition to new type of technology, whether it be it to change the new batteries, which cost around $10,000, let's say right now, or to transition into 4-wheeler new type of microvans. So it does not come cheap, and because they're still in informal sector, considered as informal sector, they don't have a way to build that trust with the formal financial institutions so as to go and tell them that now give me $30,000 to buy this 4-wheeler. So which is why I think technology can come into the play. Your first question about the cost-effective solution. I think the solution is not cost-effective at all, right? I mean, we are very vulnerable to the climate change. We are not contributing to climate change, but we are forced to be part of this transition, which means even though the solution comes expensive, what kind of incentives, right? Who gives it? And can we set up some sort of carbon credit mechanisms that actually goes directly to the hands of these women driving electric vehicles at the grassroots in Nepal? And what are the mechanisms to track that data, that it actually went to that specific women or some farmers in agriculture sector in Nepal? So that's why we started what we are doing right now, the platform to really channel these green investment to the grassroots micro entrepreneurs and let them do what they're doing right now, even though they probably don't have no idea what climate change are, right? So when we talk about the education, we talk about, in fintech we talk about technology literacy, financial literacy. Now there's also the need for the climate literacy, not just in school, but what about the businesses that are, running it and not knowing the effects of climate change, but, being affected by it? So yeah, the first question, the answer is it is not cheap, but to make it cheaper, how technology can help them. For example, some of the banks that we are working with, it's been 6 years we're in the market, and now only there is this conversation going on when they are saying, with your technology, we can trust these women drivers more. So maybe we can give 80% financing, not 70% financing. Maybe there can be 0.5% interest rate cheaper for people who decide to use your software, because we know in real time where the money is right now, so their investment is actually being utilized, right? And in terms of the South Asian cooperation and negotiation, I think Nepal just demanded in a global platform the climate justice that we need, because we are very vulnerable, not contributing as much to climate change. Now imagine, if technology can back that demand, where we can say in real time, Nepal is the carbon sink that we are, because of the forest cover that we have, right? And it's increasing. If there was the real-time data that can be backed behind that demand, how strong and powerful it could be. And I think I always read about these beautiful smaller projects that's happening in one of the corner in some country of the South Asia, but how about combine those efforts? Right? How to make one repository to say that these are the things that we are doing for green transition. How can the other parts of the world help us, right? Yeah, I think that those are my thoughts about the questions and things that we are trying out in Nepal right now. And I think technology definitely is the way to go. When we talk about technology and innovation, I don't think the I only talks about innovation. It has to be inclusive as well. Because when we're talking about green transition, we're talking about the grassroots entrepreneurs who are contributing to green transition or green economy. But what if they don't know how to use this innovation, right? How to include that? What part of the population in Nepal or South Asia is ready to be in that green transition if it is technology-led? So which is why technology can sometimes look like a simple keypad phone. For us, that's the technology that we use. If someone can use SMS, if they have the network, they can use our system. They don't need to have smartphones, any dumb phones, they can still use it. So how to make it simple and inclusive so that the grassroots micro-entrepreneurs also feel included in this green transition led by technology is something that I think I really believe in, that we need to work more, and that's where I'm working at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sonika. I think it's somehow both the Vivek Rana's presentation where he talked about there are innovations, but diffusion is a problem. And now at the informal level, when you are working, individually negotiating with banks and others, that is often very difficult. But for informal sectors, if there is a collective in some way where then you could, that works much more, that you combine a lot of groups, and I think then you can have a demand. So I would like to know a little bit more, because in many countries, the individuals could come together, informal sector entrepreneurs would come together either as a cooperative or in some platform, or somehow be united to realize their demands. So maybe we could come back to that. The last panelist is also from private sector, Ajit Vikram Shah, and he is the CEO of Lotus Holding, Nepal, and he's a chairman of American Chamber of Commerce in Nepal. Maybe you could also speak a little bit about your own enterprise and how it fits into our panel discussion today, and then address the question.
Sure, thank you for that question. First of all, thank you, Swati, for this opportunity. I think it's very important that we keep discussing this. I've got a very different view of looking at this, right? We talk about climate change and all that stuff. I mean, if you look at Nepal, we're not contributors. We are actually affected by it, right? So, I mean, yeah, we can do things better, but still, we need to ask the other people who are melting our glaciers to actually say, okay, our hydropower projects need more time to now recover because the snow is melting, right? So, I think what I have in mind is a little different in terms of, I'd like to share my experience into what I'm doing in terms of looking at problems, but we invest in these solutions for these problems because we look at every problems as opportunities, and there is a lot of problems in Nepal, and I think, I'm just focused on Nepal right now because, again, would focus more on experiences than opinions. For the questions that you mentioned, what technology would be most cost-effective, the race for transformation, are there stuff that we can do to stay ahead of the curve, and the cooperation question. I think what I'll do is I will share about a few things that we are doing as our business and what MCHAM is doing as a chamber. I'm the actually founding chair. I'm no longer the chair. Nirmalji is the current chair. My business, we're a second-generation family office. We have invested, we buy and sell companies, mostly in Nepal. We are into real estate, healthcare, pharma, and tech, right? I feel the solution for Nepal is exports. Could be products, it could be services. If you really look at our current situation, if it was not for remittance, we would probably have a very struggling economy. Remittance is one form of export. We're not in the remittance business, but we feel that there are stuff that you can do within Nepal to actually start that export out of Nepal to various countries around the world. So let me share a few things that I see and for export. I see tourism for export. I see IT-enabled services for export, and I see energy for export. We are quite active in IT-enabled services for export. Nepal has about 15 million people under the age of 30. We have a very promising population, promising workforce of people coming in. But then, however, we just have a 10-year window to actually do something about it. Because if we miss this window, then we have to wait another 45 years for a similar population demographic to return to Nepal. So we do have that window. And what we do is our business spends a lot of time on offshoring and outsourcing of work. We work for large retailers like Amazon, Best Buy, some retailers in Australia as well, on the run in Adelaide. So we do a particular sort of finance function offshoring for them. We have another business where we do a lot of logistics support for companies in Canada and FMCG distributors in Australia. Nepali people have the skills, but they are lacking the conduit to the places where their skills could actually be realized, right? We purposely chose to focus more on export because we feel that the Nepal market is relatively competitive and small compared to the global sort of the target. And we believe that if we make our dream big enough, then all your competition in Nepal actually becomes collaboration, right? So I think there's that angle as well. For tourism, we're not into hotels and we're not into capital-intensive investments in tourism. However, we have a fintech called MoCo that's only focused on trying to have that foreigner spend more money in Nepal than they currently do. And the reason for that is, we don't have the infrastructure for somebody to actually spend more money than they're currently doing. If you go to the remote trekking routes, there aren't credit card machines. I mean, very seldom you'll find credit card machines. We have our technology that actually links with Visa, MasterCard, Alipay, WeChat Pay, and then we just need a QR in those trekking routes so that that foreigner can spend, that visitor can spend more money, because once you spend that more money, that money goes a long way there. Energy, I think, Vivek, I said it, AI is there, and AI is actually scary because it's taking a lot of power, and I think AI contributes to more climate, the climate issues, and then I think there's huge opportunity in Nepal with the hydropower projects or even solar of some sort. Essentially, what has happened is you don't really need grids for power transfer anymore. You can actually set up these satellite sort of data centers around the country and then just connect internet, which is much more cheaper than building roads or connecting them to grids, right? So for the energy project, we have not started our investments yet, but we are very close to starting one. In terms of what technology would most would scale at more, I think we just have to play our strengths, right? So for us, our priorities for this question for Nepal will be very different to that of India or Bangladesh or other countries. I'm very bullish about our demographic right now, the young population. I'm very bullish about the tourism sector. Nepal, for some reason, has always sold tourism at a very cheap rate. Do the same thing in Bhutan, the price rate is almost 10 times more in Bhutan. It's a similar experience. Energy, I already mentioned about energy. The race for the innovation part, like you said, well, how does China do it? Or even let's not look at China. Let's look at the U.S., right? So why are all the trillion-dollar companies in the U.S.? Well, that's probably because they have a huge support ecosystem for these companies to actually thrive. IP and all that stuff is there. But if you really look at the formation of Facebook or Meta or Google, there's a huge grant from DARPA that went into these companies, right? So basically, I think we need people to support such things, identify and support such things. And then if it's not the government, then there could be different stakeholders. It could be a combination of government, private sector, international agencies, etc. As far as cooperation, I think the first cooperation has to happen within Nepal, right? I mean, if you really think about it, you first got to clean your house before you can actually go and try to collaborate with others, right? So I'm a true believer of that, and this is what we're trying to do with the American Chamber of Commerce. When we set up the American Chamber, the first thing I did was I went to all the other chambers and said, guys, we've got to work together on this. Right? That cooperation from within is so important, and that gives us the strength to actually come to a negotiating table with the countries outside, right? I mean, there's a lot to learn from ASEAN, there's a lot to learn from SAARC, successes and failures, but the problem is, I think we in Nepal lack a sense of unity, right? And I'm not saying that we got to agree on everything, but there is a lot of common denominator that we can agree on and work together on. So my views is very different. Again, apologize if I didn't answer the question the way it was ordered, but very bullish about Nepal, very bullish about South Asia. I mean, India is an example of what's happening there, right? How leadership and everybody sort of works together. India is operating like a startup. I mean, I've got friends in the CII, and they said that, you know, they have a meeting with the Commerce Ministry at 2 a.m. It's like, what, 2 a.m.? Are you serious? Yeah, they're all, ministry is there, the bureaucrats are there, they're all working very hard like a startup. So I think that that has to happen in Nepal, and I think I'm very bullish about this country. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it is not only in Nepal, but I think in all countries of South Asia that one could do much more in terms of cooperation within the country, getting more connected to the various underserved areas and get our optimum level, and then I think that is, then we are much more stronger. Since, I mean, I understand this is not an area in which you are working in energy, but it is, maybe we can just discuss it generally later in the panel. I have heard that in terms of Nepal's, say, total energy, of course, Nepal has a big energy future, hydro, but it is still in Nepal, the women, 90% of the women cook with traditional fuels, for instance. The hydroelectric powers and everything else, I mean, that sort of is not serving that, I mean, it is for industries, but it is not for that household consumption. And and then the smoke causes also a lot of health hazards, for instance. So it is not an area of your work, but I think when we are talking about technology and innovation and to serve the most vulnerable group, I think this is something. Again, I mean, I was here in Nepal when I was working at the ILO in the mid-80s, and I found, even at that time, and that is a big problem, and I don't think in 40 years that problem has been addressed to that extent. Anyway, I'll now open up for questions from the floor, and you can ask questions or make a comment, and please introduce yourself, your name, and your affiliation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, this is Bhim Dosresta. I'm from Tribhuvan University and I represent Computer Association of Nepal too. So when we talk about green transformation, as many of you have said that Nepal's forestry is increasing, but as just now you have said that many people are still using firewoods for cooking, or many places fossil fuels. So in this connection, what I mean is, of course, forest area is increasing, and the community forestry in Nepal is also very good, it seems. But the government policy is, there are a lot of woods or that could be utilized, but due to government policy, we keep wasting those forest products, especially woods, and we are just importing for our furnitures and all those things. Another thing is, due to climate change, many of those people in remote areas, they have to migrate because they don't have much of livelihood over there. And the other thing is, they, for fuel woods or the energy, they encroach forest. So for that purpose, one could be the regional, another is our, of course, there is a lot of water resources, but still we are not very much able to nurture all those available resources. That also can be developed with this joint collaborations with neighboring countries also. Of course, our main neighboring country is India. And we are not been very much able to nurture those water resources. So in that connection, for making livelihood better and those things for green transformation, what technology, where we can utilize. One area could be the building of database or digital data, so that utilizing that data, we could give some kind of ease to those people, so that, of course, greenery also maintained and their livelihood also maintained. So can you cite some examples on that? That's my inquisitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this need for data was also, database has been also raised before. I don't know maybe later somebody from the panel could answer that particular issue as to what is the status of database in each of these countries regarding climate and environmental issues. Anybody else?
Excuse me. My name is Sridip Rayamaji, and I'm an academician as well as I work as a policy researcher. I wear different hats. And my question to you is, especially when you were talking about the least developed countries and trademarks and patent, those are, you said something like, these have to be secured for the lower economies, I mean to say the least developed countries, right? But wouldn't that be a hindrance for lower economics that are trying to boom? Because those patents will have an issue when we are growing or when we want to develop technology. So in that thought, how would a least developed country work with the idea of developing a trademark? And because ultimately technology is something that should go across and that would help bridge the gaps. I mean to say, if it's closed, it's for someone to use, but if it's open, so what could be the relevance in that talk about how technology and innovation can be further used to bridge the digital divide, or how we could grow at a regional level? So that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think maybe panel could discuss a little bit more how we can get rid of these patents and intellectual property rights, what innovations or joint solutions we have. Yes, here.
Hello, my name is Sivraj Bhatt. I am executive board member of SAUTI, the organizer of this event. And it was quite interesting discussion, and we heard global perspective how this kind of structural transformation and productive capacity can be used to harness this equitable green transformation within a country and across the globe also. And there are good example Vivek Rana gave about this, the innovation and the practical difficulty, how to diffuse that, which is also very important for a country like Nepal, where we are, though we are very weak in innovation, but still if there is something happen by accident or by some brilliant person, then to materialize it, to make it a commercial like product, it's again difficult, how to get finance, how to connect it with the global market and other things. There are a lot of difficulties to diffuse. Even that innovation is here. If someone want to do that, but making it a practical product is very, very difficult. There are some good examples from Bangladesh, also from IT company. Sonika gave some example that how they are working on this. What came to my mind is that we need some kind of like dedicated fund. For example, we have this South Asian Food Bank, for example, just I'm giving that. This kind of, if this kind of like, which help us to work toward better intellectual property right production in our countries, so that innovation can thrive, so that the brilliant people can work that, okay, my innovation will pay off me after, say, many years. Sometimes it takes many years to develop a product, but if that doesn't materialize, people will not encourage to that, do that kind of things. So do we need a like separate fund to promote, say, this green transformation fund or something? That question I am raising to all of you, that help industry, private sector, government, other institutions like universities to collaborate, work together and help people to innovate, help people to register their intellectual property in less effort, because sometimes we are hearing that it's very difficult to even register. Even some of our legislations are so outdated, they don't recognize all aspects of intellectual property right. For example, Nepal's Intellectual Property Right Protection Act is somewhere from 1965, and we don't have all the aspects of intellectual property right under that act. So do we need that kind of mechanism, first to collaborate within the country, then within the, say, South Asian region, then make it stronger to collaborate with other like global institutions. Like if there is some institution very advanced in helping people to innovate. He gave example that why all the trillion companies are based in USA. Why not in other places? Maybe there is so strong mechanism that all the stakeholders collaborate together. Government is so supportive, they giving fund to educational institution to promote innovation and to do these kind of things also. So I think that we need to, like in second round also, we need to discuss on this also. Do we need that kind of fund which help people to collaborate and do innovation and harness all these aspects which we are talking about? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
One more question. This is Mim Amal. I work for the EU delegation in Kathmandu. So my question is related to LDC graduation. So in 2026, Nepal and Bangladesh are graduating from LDC status. what would be the challenges and opportunities after graduation in tech and tech-enabled services? What exactly these two countries need to do? What could be number 1, 2, and 3? And the next one is about migration, because if you see every day there is a long queue in the airport, not only in Kathmandu but also in other South Asian countries. And people say that if they work in Nepal or any South Asian countries, the income will be tripled when they leave their countries. So their productivity becomes 3 times more if they leave South Asian countries. So how these young crowds, could be retained in their respective countries and to have more intra-regional trade in service, goods. So what exactly could be done in this sector, technology and innovation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think,
Okay. It's Prajwal Joshi I'm from Saudi. I'm just curious because Sonikaji just mentioned that we need to channel the green investments to MSMEs. And this was the topic which arose during our first plenary session on green finance as well. So because in this session we're talking about technology and innovation, and most of our panelists are involved in some way in technology and innovation as well. So I'm just curious what technological innovations or solutions, what kind of technological innovation or solutions do we need to ensure that these green investments can be passed on to the MSMEs?
Okay, thank you. Is there any other question from audience? If not, then I will again go for a second round with the panelists. But of course, if somebody else from the audience have any follow-up question, if time permits, we will allow that. Before this time, I will go not from my side, but from the other side. I will start with Ajit. But I just wanted to raise also one more question that came to my mind after the questions from the audience. Yeah, I think, yes, I think we always, funding is very important, and one would need funds for any technology development, innovation. But again, going back to this whole question of diffusion, and in certain issues, for instance, we find that when people find it very useful, then they adopt it. And you don't need to sort of really have a government program rolling this out and things of that sort. Just to give this example that Sadat mentioned earlier about this mobile banking, for instance. In Bangladesh, it was a sort of private sector, but that person has an NGO background. They started it, people found it very useful. So I've seen in a number of situations when people find that immediately that it is, it helps them in their daily sort of life. Then even a very illiterate person, working class person, they take it up. So, more complicated technology may need much more investment or time for diffusion. But I've seen also in certain situations. So, Brendan initially talked about human ingenuity, and so where does this ingenuity comes in for solutions which, again, as you mentioned, that for our region really very funding and high investment is a problem. So could there be some low cost sort of solutions or innovations that would have very immediate effect? For instance, in Bangladesh, in the field of agriculture, I have seen so many of these innovations, that there were some engines for something else and people put it on a country boat and then they use it for something else. So I've seen all people, can innovate, and then if it works in one village, they sort of catch it over. So anyway, that's sort of my question for the panel. But I would now request Ajit first to start off with his responses to some of the questions that came up.
Thank you. I think I was writing down 3 responses. There was a couple of questions, but I'd like to address the IP question that was raised. These days, there are a lot of open source versus IP, right? I think the IP thing is more of a very capitalistic way of looking into situations. And even if we got IP approved, it'd be very difficult, given where we are right now, for it to be upheld, so to speak, right? At the American Chamber of Commerce, we do struggle with this because our members like Coca-Cola and all these people are struggling because of this, right? I think IP works best only in the US and Europe and most of the developed nations, right? We're talking about LDC and graduation of LDC. So I think we do have to be practical about our wants also, right? So there are low-hanging fruits and there are some wish lists, right? And then I think as long as we're practical for technology, for solutions, there is a lot of open source innovation out there. So that would be my input on IP. And however, I mean, if there's something that you have found, I think AmCham does have provision to register this IP in the United States. So we do, I mean, we're helping people that way, but again, it's not cost beneficial, right? If your customers is in the United States, then yes, it may make sense. If it's in Nepal, then probably it won't make sense, right? Green Transformation Fund. I mean, we've got lots of funds here. I mean, the US just pledged about $500 million to Nepal for the next 5 years, right? I mean, I think the issue is not funds. The issue is more of a collaborative approach to apply for those funds. I mean, if you look at every nook and cranny around Nepal, there's a lot of these different NGOs trying to do different things through funds, right? And which is good, but if there could be collaboration of these people, I think they would take away a lot of redundant, admin costs, etc. So I think we could do a lot more than that. But then obviously funds are important, but I feel there has to be a consensus on really. I mean, instead of spreading funds thin, it may be more apt to actually say, okay, let's pick up this problem and then really try to solve this problem instead of trying to solve a lot of problems in some way. Yeah, the gentleman raised a question on young crowd, can they be retained? The answer today is no, but it's actually a good thing that they're leaving. I mean, they're leaving because there's no opportunities for them here. But because they left, I mean, there are some blue collar people that leave and then the white collar people that leave, right? Which are very different. Because of all the sufferings of the blue collar workers that went to the different places in the world, they said they would not make that mistake for their children. So that's why the education industry is booming in Nepal. Everybody's realized that education is important. And so that's one good thing. Second is, if you look at this migration issue, it has happened in India also in the past. Now there's a lot of people coming back to India to actually do something for the country. White collar migration, I think, is going to slow down given what's happened with the migration issues in Australia, Europe, and all that stuff. I think they'll be more conservative. I think Australia has already decided to stop Nepali migrants to going into Australia. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a short-term problem with this. That's the way I see it. And I think we really need to be, again, realistic, accept the fact, and try to see what opportunity comes out of it, right? One of the things that we do for the offshoring is we are reaching out to the Nepali diaspora and say, hey, if you've already gotten a job there, now look for a job for your sibling here in Nepal, and you can actually be a distributor for our country, right? And if you look at, I have a lot of friends in Australia, they say Nepalese people are the nicest people, right? Let's sell that. right? And similar in Singapore, there's so much respect for Nepalese people in Singapore. Let's play this to our strength, right? Because complaining about it will not give us any solution. So thank you.
Thank you very much. What I like about Ajit, and I have seen it in some of our young entrepreneurs also, that they are so optimistic about, they have this
I'm very,
can-do
very optimistic about
attitude,
Nepal.
and always they are seeing opportunities. And so that's why I was thinking that I want to keep him as my last speaker so that you can all leave this room feeling really very, and maybe I will come back if everybody else is talking only about problems. But one question, and then maybe you can end, I'll come back to you later, Ajit, is that, yes, I agree there are lots of funds, but sometimes just some of the application for funds sometimes is so bureaucratic and complicated that whether somebody, an SME or informal sector, they would be able to, they don't even know. So, how to really go about, because I know many small NGOs, for instance, they just can't apply because of these guidelines for applications are very, complicated. So we can come back to that. But I will now ask Sonika, your responses.
Yes, thank you. I would like to address a few of the questions. Because we were talking about the fund, probably I'll start with that as well. I think, when we talk about funds, it can mean grants, aids, or investments, right? So I think Nepal really need to look into investments rather than grant mindset, because we've had enough. We might get enough as well. But what about the impact and the outcomes of it, right? So I personally believe there needs to be, when we're talking about prosperity, there needs to be profitability as well. So we cannot always talk about people, planet, prosperity, but people, planet, and purpose, but no prosperity, right? So I think whatever the fund that we have or might create, for example, there are some green bonds, maybe for women-linked investment, there can be the orange bonds, right? So what goes in and what comes out of it, and how it helps in moving further to grow the businesses. I think that's where I think the funding is needed, rather than the grants or the aids, but mostly the investments. Maybe it can be the revolving fund, right? It cannot be, it does not absolutely have to be fully investment, but it revolves around, one sector helped, okay, then, one location helped, then it moves to other, or how it can be revolving so it does not gets consumed. So I personally am the believer of that kind of fund rather than grants. And about the technologies that Prajwalji brought about, because that's something that we are working on right now, right? So I think the traceability is definitely missing. Whatever the financing that we talk in the global platform about green financing, climate financing, billions of dollars, but where are they going? It said only, I think, 90% is traceable. What about the other 10%, right? I'm not sure about the stats, but that's somewhere I read about it. So how to make it so traceable that whatever the ticket size of the funding, be it $1 or $1 billion, it has to be traceable. So the source is so trusted, source is so confident that, even a dollar, a cent is actually going towards green initiatives. And it cannot be, monitoring and evaluation after 2 years, about the fund where it's used, right? So it has to be real time, it has to be now. And that's where technology can really help in, and that's where we are investing our collective effort as well, to build something like that, to really track where the financing is going right now, not 2 years later. And another thing, I'm not an expert in forestry, but Bhimdoji brought upon a few things about community forest and forest reserve. So we recently started working with community forest user groups. Again, stating that I'm not the expert in forestry, but what I liked in that initiative is one, community forest user groups and preservation of forest in that way is really working for Nepal. That's why the covers are increasing. Having said that, the policies about only being able to use the dead and fallen trees is also good in terms of how people are not able to exploit because of that. But maybe there needs to be some policies about how to really build those forest enterprise, because that's where our work lies in. So whatever the produces the forest is able to produce, for example, it can be turmeric, it can be handicrafts out of the dead fallen trees, right? So how to really promote that. So the community forest user groups, they're not only voluntarily preserving the forest, but also getting something out of it. So what's the business side of it? What's the commercialization of what we already have, right? And it's not just about being the carbon sink, but what about the other type of, potentials that we can see within the forest enterprise? And I think to track, is it exploited to build this forest enterprise, or is it not? Again, the database, I think that's where technology can come in as well to track. I wouldn't say I don't want to say we have what we need for that, but I think the technology sector in Nepal definitely might have solution for that as well. But having said that, it needs the combined effort of the policymakers, regulators, technology experts, right, and also the community. So it's definitely the collective effort that I see. Whatever needs to happen, have to have all parties involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonika. I could see that, in this debate about grants versus investment, public sector and private sector views may be different. And also, in certain kinds of situations, probably one needs grants. And in certain situations, you can talk about investment. But I know that more and more now people use this word investment and looking for outcomes, but whether one can get a very sort of immediate sort of results, I'm not sort of very sure. In terms of community forest, I think I will be interested in knowing what kinds of trees are being planted, because I remember that many years ago, this community forests also got a bit, there were debates about, there were these traditional kinds of woods, and then the newer sort of forests, the way community forests were working and what was being planted was not necessarily very useful. But I'm not sort of, I don't know whether what are the current debates on community forests. I'm not very up to date, but I'll be interested in hearing a little bit more about this. Yusuf, now.
Thank you, ma'am. So I'll address some of the questions. Before that, I think we already had a bit of a debate regarding intellectual property rights and IP, and this often it comes down to this, that people sometimes think that, all invention is profit driven and profit motivated, but ultimately sometimes it's not just profit, it's if there is a need for something, I think that's where the human ingenuity comes in and people come up with some kind of a solution. So often I feel that invention is not only driven by profit, but rather invention is driven by necessity and by a need for some kind of a technology to be there. So that is something that we need to think about. The other thing is that there is a story regarding, it's called the stag hunt game. Like a group of hunters go to a forest and they see a stag, it's like a deer, it's running around. And if they want to hunt that stag, then all of them have to cooperate and hunt the stag together. Each of them alone, they cannot get the stag. But if they work alone, they can hunt rabbits. But rabbits are, very small. So things like climate change, these things are such big problems. We have to get together and work together to solve these issues. Otherwise, we will only end up with rabbits if we are working alone. So this is something that I think has come up in our discussions, unity, working together, collaboration. And this is something that we need to think about quite seriously, because ultimately climate change is an existential threat to humankind, and any technology which is designed to either mitigate the effects of climate change or adapt to climate change or deal with loss and damage, this kind of a technology should be a global public good, because this is something which is affecting all of us. And so that is where I think the solution is that even after LDC graduation, we can propose for an amendment under TRIPS that technology which is extremely relevant to climate change and which is considered as critical for addressing climate change, that kind of technology could have a waiver on intellectual property rights for all countries, or if it not a waiver completely, at least it should be given to poorer countries at a preferential or at an affordable rate, so that they can adapt to the effects of climate change. And this is something that has been there in the international discourse for a long time. Like you mentioned, the first conference of the United Nations on Human Environment, it was held in 1972. And in that conference, there was a declaration that environmentally sound technologies should be made available to the poorer countries. And many, many years later, more than 40 years later, in the SDGs also, they mentioned that environmentally sound technologies should be made available to the poor countries. So this, discourse has been there for a long time, but there has been a gap between, the rhetoric and the reality. So we have not really taken the necessary steps to make it happen. And regarding some of the questions you mentioned, with LDC graduation, there will be challenges, of course, in terms of technology, the waivers, the general waiver and pharmaceutical waiver under TRIPS will no longer be applicable. But neither Nepal nor Bangladesh have graduated yet. So we still have some time left. It's not much, but we still have some time left. And in this time, I think it is high time that we act within our own countries and also cooperate with each other and build our research and development capacity, because now is the time that we can take advantage of those waivers and we can reverse engineer many of the things that we will need later on. So this is an opportunity for us to invest in our R&D. And with brain drain, which you mentioned, I agree that they are going to a better place probably, and maybe it's better not to stop them. But at the same time, many countries have addressed these issues. In China, for instance, there are government scholarships where students are given the, kind of condition that they will only get the scholarship if they study and come back to China and stay there. Even, I think, in the Commonwealth scholarship, there is a condition that you must return to your home country and stay in your home country for a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you will get into trouble with the Commonwealth. So there can be conditions like that, where you can make sure that your high-skilled labor is coming back into your country. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yusuf, there was a general question about what one may lose when you graduate out of LDC. So apart from just this technology, can you sort of mention 2-3 things that may happen for both Bangladesh and Nepal when we graduate? So I think that was a very general question about LDC graduation and risks. So can you respond to that?
Yeah, so apart from technology, of course, the biggest loss will be market access, preferential market access, duty-free, quota-free market access to major markets of the world like the European Union. So that will be a major setback, and a bigger setback for Bangladesh, particularly because we were an LDC for nearly 50 years since our independence. And because we were an LDC, because we got duty-free, quota-free market access in our largest export markets, we never really invested in our trade negotiation capacity. And we don't really have the kind of people in Bangladesh who will go to, EU and negotiate with 27 different countries and come up with a trade deal. So I think the only trade agreement we could manage was with Bhutan, where we don't have too much trade even. So building that trade negotiation capacity, also interministerial coordination, like in Bangladesh, we have Ministry of Commerce, which deals with trade, but we have National Bureau of Revenue, which collects taxes. That's under Ministry of Finance. And then we have the Investment Development Authority, which is under Prime Minister's office. So everyone is, in their own field. So it's very hard for foreign investors to come in and do business in Bangladesh, sometimes because of this lack of coordination. And also, like I said, trade negotiation capacity. That is the whole essence of the LDC group. Why did we have a group in the first place? Because these countries are small and poor, and they cannot come up, negotiate with such large, powerful countries one-to-one. That is the whole essence of this multilateral, approach to this. But when we graduate, then we will become alone, and then we are in trouble. So that is the problem.
Vivek? Oh, you have to.
Thank you. The Sonika and previous gentlemen have answered most of the question. There are a couple of things that I wanted to bring it to the discussion. That obtaining lending for SMEs and MSMEs is a very difficult task in Nepal. Especially they don't somehow fit into the banking debt criteria. And it is almost impossible to develop a channel whereby these organizations can function. A couple of things on this. They have not been listed under what is called priority sector, because in Nepal, the banks have certain regulatory requirements set by the central bank in terms of certain amount of lending has to go to that particular sector, like hydropower there is, agriculture there is. But when it comes to technology-oriented companies or companies that help them reach their goals, they are not quite well listed with the central bank in terms of regulating commercial banks to provide at a lower interest rate. So that could be one of the key issues which definitely needs to be factored in. Otherwise, they would be left out on the lurch. Because the competition is growing. Government does understand the need for it, but there's not been much work done in this matter. So it has been difficult for the banks to avail credit in this regard, which is very unfortunate. The second part, what Mr. Shivaraj Bhatta had mentioned about having, some kind of a fund for diffusion, and what Madam Professor has said that, if it's something that people will feel the need to use it, they will use it. They will somehow find a way to use it. Those companies will prosper. But what we have seen here in Nepal is, there has been quite a bit of funds that have been allocated for the government to help the entrepreneurs. There's actually a fund created by the government to help entrepreneurs individually as well as in groups. But to get access to the fund has been impossible, which is a self-defeating purpose. It's a self-defeating prophecy. Because unless we create an institution that's going to help these companies or individuals grow, simply by just having the funds allocated will make things even worse. But that would be somehow a starting point where we could have where we could build an institution or build a system around that when these innovators are actually seen as something important to the society.
But why is the access a problem? Is it because of bureaucratic inertia? It is, I mean, why they are not able to access? I mean, how would you link?
Very good question, Professor. The answer is pretty much similar to Bangladesh. You know, it's extremely bureaucratic. Nobody wants to take a risk. What happens if this goes bust tomorrow? Number one. Number two, for some reason, these funds got extremely politicized. Now you understand, right? She has the answer. You know, and you were only going to a certain group of individuals who are not actually the innovators. You know.
Now
She
will
gets
be
the answer.
More interested
Yes.
in political science.
That was number two. And then a lot of people got very, very discouraged because even though the country had earmarked huge amount of funds for innovation and startups, they never got utilized. So at this time, it started about a year ago, when these people who were actually hoping that they would get these funds to develop something new that was going to be helpful to the society, suddenly realized that they were in the wrong business, you know, without the government help. And also because of the economic downturn, they were not able to, you know, provide that market traction in terms of adoption. So that has been very difficult for these companies and these individuals. The other thing mostly important in Nepal, and that's true not only in Nepal, very true a lot of developing countries in Africa, also in South America, is a lot of policies that have been developed are not developed based on evidence. They are not evidence-led policies. They are policy-based evidences. So when you talk to people, they say, oh, we came up with this policy, that is why this thing is coming. But not looking at the evidence and saying, we have this evidence here, let's work towards developing that policy. And that has, you know, to a larger extent, you know, made things very difficult for people. And when they are moving forward with new ideas, you know, Nepal and Nepalese youth have been very hesitant. They say that with the same amount of effort here, with the same amount of rigor, if I can possibly make more money overseas, I'll probably go there. So the whole issue about, you know, mass exodus of people leaving Nepal is also coming. And a lot of them are not just, you know, they actually plain workers or people that are going in factory, but they're also white-collar workers. They're saying that, hey, this is the reason why, you know, we have to move out. The third aspect, when the gentleman, Ajit, mentioned about, you know, why we have a culture in let's say, Silicon Valley, you know, where there are great entrepreneurs, there's a tech hub, there are 5 more important forces that are supporting the tech hub. Now, those things exist. There is a culture of innovation there. In those parts of the world, they reward failures. You know, they say, hey, you failed, but maybe something else you do, you are going to be a success. You can't see that in other parts of the world. In Japan, if you fail, you're almost dead. In some parts of Europe, it's like that. And I'm sure Brendan can, you know. And here in Nepal, it's pretty much the same. You know, failures are not there, they're not well captured, and people don't get a chance to improve the second time. I think these are the supporting infrastructures and policy reforms that the government needs to take if they want to see this sector moving more forward, more profitable for the society and the nation.
But just one question to you. I mean, when you sort of would put an obstacle like culture, then, you know, one is in a very difficult territory. It is like a chicken and egg situation, because you still have to think of some way of breaking out of that culture. So what would be the entry point? If failures, if you fail once, you are never given a chance. So then, even this will perpetuate. So how would one break out of that cultural situation?
Well, there has been, institutions, even from the government side, that had encouraged people to try, even though they've failed. There has been, instances where they have. But the push and the rigor for these kind of effort is not seen for a long time. And it's not only in Nepal, it's omnipresent in the region itself. So, but that's something that, we have to fight individually and as well as collectively to develop, because that's the most important thing, changing the culture. I think that's something that everybody has to work towards.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point about good governance, because in Bangladesh also we had some government funds for startups, and there were lots of competitions with young people and investors and innovators coming in with their ideas. And ultimately, whoever was finally awarded the fund, they had to give some money to this government office, to that office, and what they ended up with was often too small to actually get anything done. So good governance, I think, is going to be crucial.
Brendan?
Thank you, Professor. I think we've run out of time, so I'm going to just leave you with 3 ideas, and because I'm the final speaker, a note of optimism about the future. Is it not till, are we not already over time?
No, I think we close at, you have 10 minutes. 4 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Oh, then I'll go on. No, 3 points. I think the first one, definitely intellectual property is always an emotive issue. And that's particularly because of what we've seen with the vaccines and COVID-19, because of the Monsantos of the world and the GMOs. But I think also the narrative is shifting as well. It's no longer a north-south issue. Many developing countries are at the front of the curve on innovation and technology. So most recently, the European Union is demanding that Chinese companies transfer intellectual property to Europe if they want to establish manufacturing capacity for batteries and access EU subsidies in the EU. So that's something kind of, you're actually like, what was that? That's the opposite. And I'm originally South African, so from my part of the world, we are demanding intellectual property protection for indigenous knowledge, biodiversity, genetic resources. So I think the big thing is finding that balance and finding that sweet spot. Intellectual property rights were never supposed to be a God-given right. It's a social contract. The inventor is awarded protection and reward for a particular period of time. Patents is 20 years. But in return, there has to be some element of fair access. And so particularly for least developed countries, the TRIPS agreement provides a whole range of flexibilities about how they can access and leverage that. And even here in Nepal, there's a particular company that I'm aware of, Himalaya Biotrade, which is trademarked and has global recognition because of using the fauna and the flora from the forests to produce clothing and packaging and paper, which is used by global brands as well. So, intellectual property has value. It's finding that balance. But I think as we make the point in our report, we don't have to go big bang, you need a major patent regime. You often look at just what are the low-hanging fruits and what best serves your economy at that point in time. Second point is just that I took the point about the outdated IP regime in Nepal, and I think when Nepal graduates, this is going to be one of the challenges, and both financial and institutional resources are going to be required to meet most of those requirements of the TRIPS agreement and build those institutions and the protection and the enforcement capacity, depending on how the government wants to proceed with that. And the third point was around our friend from the EU Commission delegation, specifically the question on tech-enabled services after graduation. I think I'd like scratching my mind a bit around that because I think the traditional trade in goods aspects were addressed, but I was thinking the biggest thing for Nepal, I guess, is the digital divide, and closing that digital divide. You need the digital connectivity, the infrastructure. So graduation per se, I don't think is going to make much of a difference in terms of tech-enabled services, but there could be an opportunity as a graduated least developed country to improve access to international capital and finance. There's the opportunity to leverage aid for trade, to invest in that infrastructure and the connectivity that's needed to participate in the digital economy. And then I think just the improvement in Nepal's international reputation as a country and as a destination for investment could attract in some of these investments that are needed in these firms. The downside perhaps is losing access to some of these services markets under the LDC services waiver. But how effective that has been is quite questionable. And the point on optimism I wanted to make is, I think, leaving this conference, there's a saying I live my life by, which is we all have a duty of optimism towards ourselves in the future. The reason is because we are the only species on this planet that can think and can dream of a better tomorrow. Yusuf Stagg can't, his bunny can't, but only we as the human species can dream about tomorrow and make tomorrow happen. So, we shouldn't be pessimists. We should always be optimists that have concern. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Quick question to all the panelists. I know we have Brendan here is keeping time, and I can see 5 minutes are left. In our region, we are talking a great deal about these solar panels and then windmills and all of this. And I hear that there is a great future for all of this. But I haven't seen, really they are really not catching on. I mean, again, going back to certain innovation, and then diffusion and what people would accept. So what really you think are the future for this solar energy or wind energy? And because I have seen it, it doesn't sort of spread really. I mean, we are installing these things, but somehow it is not catching. So is this really something that people will want to adapt in a very big way here in Nepal, the solar energy, wind setup, those things, or not?
Sure.
Because I think people sort of talk about these new waves. And final question, just one thing, because this I started with, that we are interested in equitable green transformation. So for vulnerable groups, what would be one technology or innovation that would help the vulnerable groups?
Okay. The first question on solar, I think the wave is coming. It hasn't come fully. I mean, you look at companies like Tesla, who's betting big on solar, right? Technology efficiency has improved a lot, but I think it's also driven by market dynamics, and market dynamics are not necessarily controlled by end users, but distributors and people who actually make money in the system, right? So I feel there is, this will happen. We have seen some progress in solar energy. We've seen different houses, so many houses with solar panels, so many offices on solar panels. So things are happening, but to your right point, it's not reached the roots whereby, and I think reaching the roots probably will not happen so quick, but maybe the distribution that distributes to the roots will have some sort of a solar thing. So directly or indirectly, it is, I feel, already happening. And second, for the marginalized community, I think, that's such a big and broad question. But one of the things that I feel that we can do is, there are many ways to figure out what technology can solve for that particular marginalized community. Agriculture is pretty big. It's a funny story. We sell raw ginger to India. They package it up and sell it back to us at a profit. Stuff like that is happening, and there's technology like drone technology for delivery. I mean, the terrains of Nepal is quite tough, so that the trade, the middlemen actually make a lot of money in the process. That's why the vegetables and the fruits that's available in Kathmandu hardly comes from Nepal. Most of them come from India, right? So I think through logistics technology like drones and all that stuff, I think that'll really touch the grassroots. But then again, that's more of an opinion. I'm not an expert in that. I need to say that. Thank you.
I think we'll go around.
Well, I don't have that much, but I think you touched upon a question when you talked about 40 years ago as well. The situation was same in terms of energy and the burning of the firewoods and stuff. I think again going back to the point where how accessible these new type of technologies or new energy access is for the grassroots that we are talking about, right? So one of the thing about the solar access, one of the companies in Nepal are doing is a pay-as-you-go service for the grassroots. So they don't have to really buy the whole tools and equipments at once, but they can pay as you go. It's kind of a rental service, and it's called Compower. So they've been doing pretty good job in terms of solar access for the grassroots. So these kind of creative way of increasing access can also be there. So I'm not an expert on solar, but that's something that I've seen in the market and that have been working also. So how to really scale that up nationwide, right? So that's the real challenge that I see right now. Thank you.
Yeah. With renewables, I think in some countries they have natural geographic advantages. Like in Nepal, Bhutan, they have hydroelectric power. In Iceland, you have geothermal. So some countries have natural geographic advantages which they can take advantage of, but not all countries have those kinds of advantages. And for them, it's harder to make that transition. And also in South Asia, particularly, fossil fuel companies and businesses are very powerful, very close to the government, and they are directly financing political parties also. So you know them probably. So that makes it even more difficult, because in one country and in some other countries also, they're making deals with the government and with dictating the kind of policy that will happen. So it's very difficult to make that transition. And regarding technology for vulnerable people, I would say that in Bangladesh there was one survey done, a national household level survey, where we went to all of the households and asked them that how much of your income did you lose after getting affected by a natural disaster. So for households who are in the bottom 10%, that means the poorest 10% households in Bangladesh, they lose as much as 90% of their income after being affected by one natural disaster. So for them, I think what is important is early warning and evacuation, and after there is loss and damage, some kind of support from the government.
I don't think I can beat on the duty of optimism, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I think we are asked to close this session, so a big round of applause for all the panelists. And thank you so much, I think, for being here, and I hope you have learned as much as I have from the discussions in the panel. I'm going back much richer in terms of my knowledge and understanding of the complexities of the situation. Thank you again.